What is happening, everybody? MG here, MGCovers, bringing you a brand new handicapping video. Title of this video is how to convert a stat into an actual line college football example. Super excited about this video. This is a real life example, something I'm actually doing with my stat model for college football. We're going to share that in just a second. As always, your first time watching this video, if you want to subscribe to the channel, you will get a ton of value out of this channel. We have a lot of videos here related to sports handicapping. I give you the unadulterated truth, actually how this business works. A lot of video playlists on college football, handicapping college, NFL, and college football, as well as all the other sports. Also, if you follow me on social media, MGCovers, cover spelled with a Z. Follow me on Instagram. I give a lot of little nuggets on my storyline. So just follow me. You get a ton of value. All right, so let's dive into this video. Now, just to give some backstory, I wasn't going to make a video on this, but I said, you know what? This is a real life example, so I figured I would. This is something I'm actually doing to my college football model. Now, the college football model I use is very good. It's a very solid model. It's derived from my NFL model with a few alterations. Now, it's a criterion-based model originally, and what that means is if a team meets these two criteria that comes from these stats, then it's considered a play. Well, what I've done is I've actually taken the two stats that I'm using for college football and turned those into an actual line. Now, in this video, I'm not going to tell you the stats that I'm actually using, but I'm going to show you how to take a random stat and actually convert that into a line, okay? So we take a look at this first game here. This was from October 24th, 2020, the game between Coastal Carolina and Louisiana Lafayette. Now, so what I'm doing off screen, you can't see, is I'm taking the Coastal Carolina stat that I'm using, and for my college football model, I use stats from the last 3 games. Okay, so which means if you're looking at this, I'm using Coastal Carolina stats for the 3 games prior to this game. All right, so the stat that I'm looking at, if I take the Coastal Carolina stat and subtract it from Louisiana Lafayette stat, I end up getting an 8. Whoops, my bad. Let me take this out here. I get an 8. So that's a realistic football line, right? So you can see here I have Coastal Carolina in this example favored by 8. They actually won by 3. The sportsbook line was +9. So the point I want to show is this stat that I'm using doesn't require any alterations at all. If I just take Coastal Carolina stat that I'm looking at, subtract it from Louisiana Lafayette stat, that equals 8. So that's a realistic football number, right? However, when we use the second stat that I'm looking at, let's see, that comes to 33, which means when I take the stat, and 33 in favor of Coastal, by the way. So the stat I'm looking at, if I subtract it, the Coastal Carolina stat from Louisiana Lafayette stat, I get 33. But here's the problem, is 33 compared to the 8, that 33 is not a realistic, quote, spread line, right? A big difference from the 8. So how do we get that 33 to look like the 8? Well, it's very simple. We're going to divide that number, and I've already done this off screen, but if you were actually doing this live trying to figure out, you would just experiment with it. So if you take the 33 divided by 2, that gives you what, 16 and a half. So, but if you divide it by 3, and this is a little Google Sheets lesson here as well, you end up with 11. Now, the 11 is a more realistic spread line, right? And it's closer to the 8. So, in layman's terms, very simple. If you have a stat, you just divide that, and it's a big number. You divide that stat down until it looks like a realistic number relative to that sport. Okay? So in this particular example, when I was doing this, originally, that's what I did. I just divided it by 2, and that was 15, and that wasn't really that realistic. So when I divide that number by 3, I end up with 11. And 11 is very similar to the 8. So now, what do I do with these two stats here? Well, The original way I did it was I took the 8 and the 11, added those together. So let's do that here. So this would equal this plus, whoops, my bad, this plus this. Wait a second. Okay, wait up. All right, so this is Google Sheets plus this number. There we go. So we get 19. So that's the total number. And if we take 19, divide the 19 by 2, equals, then that number becomes 9.5. Now, I've already experimented with this. I back tested a ton of games with this, and what I found was that number was a little too high. So what I actually ended up doing was I took this 8 and 11 and divided it by 3. So I took 11 plus this number divided by 3. Oops, my bad. I got to total it first. Whoops. So this is going to equal, let's start over. So this number plus this number, and then this number divided by 3. This is Google Sheets. I might make another video about this. So the actual line is, the final line is going to be Coastal Carolina minus 6. And by dividing it by 3 instead of that 2, I got a more realistic number. So my final line for this would be Coastal Carolina minus 6. The actual line was Coastal plus 9, and they actually won outright. So just to sort of review all this, the first stat, and you'll do this if you build enough models, sometimes a stat just works out, where all I did was subtracted, Coastal stat that I was using minus Louisiana Lafayette stat. It came to an 8. However, this stat ended up being a 33. So I took this 33, I divided it by 3. That gives me 11. And then I took this number, added it to the first stat, and I got 19. And I took that 19, divided that by 3, and that gave me a 6. So again, for this game, my line was Coastal Carolina minus 6. So let's do another one here. All right. So let's go to... Let's use my big Gamecocks with the upset last year over Auburn. All right, so let's take a look. So the first stat, we simply just subtract South Carolina's stat. Again, the stat that I'm using, it's an average of the last 3 games. And when you build models, don't forget you want to use the best indication of future performance as most recent performance. You don't use year-to-date stats. That's what the general public will look at. We want most recent stats, and you can really find some sharp angles that way. So if we take South Carolina's line, 4, 5, 6, 7, we have 7, South Carolina minus 7. And then when we subtract the other number minus that number, we get 36. So very, very similar to our first example. Yeah, almost identical, right? So we have... this number is 36. We divide that 36 by 3. That equals 12. 12 plus 7 is 19. We take that 19, divide it by 3. That ends up being 6. All right. So I want to show you an example where we have to make an alteration. And we're going to go down to this. Let's see here. Yeah, this is perfect. We're going to look at this Liberty-Syracuse matchup here. So the first stat, if I subtract Liberty stat from Syracuse, I get a 10, so that's Liberty minus 10. However, when I add up the other stat, and this happens a lot with stats, and we're going to, I get 174, right? So that is a very unrealistic number, okay? So, and you can see what that does to the line. It makes it Liberty minus 22. The actual line is Liberty minus 3, and you can say, well, they won by 17. Yeah, but that's not really a realistic number. So what I've done is I've used something called the truncated mean. What the truncated mean is, you're basically taking out a number that's not a realistic number. For example, in soccer, let me write this down so you can see it. Just look right here. So soccer, the average max goals a team scores in soccer is 3. So why is that important? Well, in my model, if a team scores, say, 4 goals in a matchup in a game, I will count that as a 3. If a team scores 5 goals in a match, I will count that as 3. It's called the truncated mean, because what happens is you can see this big number here throws off the entire model a little bit. So what I did is I maxed this out at 60. So regardless, so any number 60 and above, it defaults back to 60. And look what that does to the actual number. It brings it in line. So 60 minus 20, 60 divided by 3 is 20. You take 20 plus 10 equals 30. You divide that by 3, and the number is 10. So our line for this game is Liberty minus 10. And the actual sportsbook line is minus 3. See how that's more realistic for that game? And, of course, Liberty won that. All right. So that's an example from college football. And just to sort of review, again, some stats, and you'll just have to experiment to sort of see what, how the numbers shake out. So I was just giving an example there where if you've got this big number, you just divide it down until it looks like this number. Now, let me show you, let's sort of switch gears. Let's look at an NBA example. And we're going to look at a box score. All right. And again, I've always talked about looking at box scores as a great way to build models, because what you're looking for, is there a stat that correlates to winning? So hypothetically, let's say Toronto, they average 48% field goal percentage for, say, the last 5 games. I know this is a box score, but just bear with me and walk through this with me. So Toronto averages 48% field goal percentage. So let's write down 48 here. And then their opponent, let's say Orlando, averages, I hate when it does this, 46%. Okay. So if you take 48 minus 46, that comes to a 2. So the average margin of victory in the NBA is 9. So to make this a more realistic number, again, you can experiment with this. So let's just say hypothetically, for this sake of this video, let's take that 2 and multiply it times 3. So the actual line would be Toronto minus 6. You see what I did there? So if that number is, and you could experiment with it, you might want to say 2 times 4, and you make it an 8. All right. And just to look, and you can see here Toronto, in fact, did win that game convincingly. And they were favored by, check that out. They were actually favored by 6, y'all. The line was Orlando plus 6.5. How about that? All right, so let's look at this Detroit-Utah game. So you can see the difference there. So in that example, we had to multiply that number, that stat, to make it more realistic, whereas the college football, we actually divided that number down. So let's take a look at this Detroit-Utah matchup. And again, hypothetically, let's say Detroit was a 42. Say this was an average, field goal percentage for the last 5 games. Utah was 46. So 46 minus 42 is a 4. Multiply that times 2, and now our line becomes Utah minus 8. And the actual line was Utah minus 12. And they won by 12. So again, that's how you would, that's just one way to do it for basketball. So again, just sort of review it. And you could do this for any sport. You can do it for college football. You can do it for NFL. So you find the stat that you're using, and, subtract, team A from team B. Take a look at what that number is. It might be where you take both numbers. Let's say maybe the first number is not realistic. Let's say this number is a 57 and this number over here is a 75, right? Well, what you might do in this particular example, let's take this 57, add it to, pretend this is a college football example. Let's say the stat you were using, you came up with a 57 for one stat, and it was a 75 for the other stat. So those aren't realistic lines for college football, right? Minus 57, minus 75. So but we want to average these two together. So let's do that. So we take this number here, add it to, whoops, my bad. And we get 132. So let's take 132 and, my bad. Let's take 132 divided by 10, and that's 13. So there's another way you could do it, you know? So again, we took these two numbers that were not, quote, realistic lines, added them together, divided them by 2. The reason that was important, that means we're weighing 50% with this stat, 50% with this, divided by 10, and we get 13. So that's another example. So anyway, that's one way to do it. If you got questions, shoot me an email, mg@mgcovers.com. Try to answer it best I can. If you want access to this model I just showed you, this will go live here in about 2 weeks after college football teams have played 2 games at least. I'll have the stat model up. You can get access to that for $49.95 per month. You also get all of my coaching videos. I think we have about 35 coaching videos just this year alone, plus all the videos made from 2020, 2019. So a ton of content there. You get unlimited email access to me. You can ask me any questions if you're a client. Even though I just said I would answer questions for some of you, that's limited, obviously, if you're not a client. And if you want access to all of my plays, that is $99 per month. And you also get, with that, access to all the stat models as well as all the coaching videos. There is a link in the description box if you want to sign up for that. And I hope this video helped. Give it a like if it gave you some value, and we will talk to you guys soon. Peace.